Is the Incredible Hulk as bad as everyone says? Let's find out. An experiment is performed on Bruce Banner. Something goes wrong, and Bruce transforms into the Hulk for the first time. He destroys the lab and injures several people, including Betty. Later, Bruce visits her in the hospital. He remembers a more intimate time with Betty. The relationship is more than professional, strengthening the incident's emotional impact. This isn't just a colleague he's hurt, it's someone he loves. General Ross forces him to leave, and Bruce becomes a fugitive running from the military. This 3-minute sequence conveys a lot of information. Not only does it provide the necessary background for the rest of the story, it supplies a plethora of small details that foreshadow future events. The sound cannons will be used against Hulk in Virginia. One of Bruce's messages was intercepted, incentivizing him to use more encrypted communication methods. A list of known associates includes Leonard Samson, who we meet later in the movie. Although it's weird that he's listed here, as I get the impression that Bruce has never met him before. Either way, these are just some of the details that can be found in the montage. If I have any complaint, it's that this information comes and goes too quickly. I don't know if your average viewer will catch most of this, even after multiple watches. We cut to Bruce in Rosina Favela, Brazil, and his life there is shown with similar efficiency. We're introduced to Days Without Incident. It tells us when he last transformed, and is a unique way to track the passage of time.
The Days Without Incident also came out later. That's something I wanted to, just to give it a time log, not to say 5 years later or like.
Days Without Incident is currently 158. That's a little over 5 months. So we can assume Bruce has been hiding in Brazil for that time. We're later told that Bruce has been on the run for 5 years.
He made it 5 years and got across borders without making any mistakes. He's not going to use the damn credit card now.
Meaning Brazil is only the latest location Bruce has set up his life in. This establishing shot comes together to create a strong sense of chaos, unease, and claustrophobia.
It's an enormous favela. 300,000 people live in there, and see they build on top of each other. Once a guy builds a house in front of you, you want to get the view, so you build higher. So they really pile up.
These communities that literally hundreds of thousands of people live in, they're built on hillsides, and they're one structure on top of another structure on top of another structure on top, and there's little corridors that work their way through them, and stairways going down to the next level.
There's definitely no codes there.
This is not the ideal place for someone who wants to stay calm. We're later shown that Bruce must stay calm to prevent transforming into the Hulk. So this tells the audience, Bruce is safe, but for how long? We're shown Bruce's daily routine. While he cooks breakfast, he reads from a Portuguese to English dictionary and watches local Sesame Street.
Yes, that sounds like an excellent idea!
He meets with a trainer to learn martial arts and breathing techniques. He wears a heart rate monitor to track his pulse. He works at a bottling factory where a bunch of tough guys bully him. They call him Gringo, implying they bully him out of prejudice. Their bullying is not arbitrary. His boss begs to put him on a payroll because of how smart he is, implying Bruce has avoided this so far. After work, he cooks up a solution in his homemade lab, a potential cure, and is disappointed with the results. So much of Bruce's character is conveyed in these 10 minutes. He is efficient, learning the local language while performing other tasks. He is proactive. He learns to fight, which would be useful against those that hunt him, and practices breathing exercises to prevent a Hulk out. He's smart. He displays a knowledge of hardware and biology that most normal people lack. And he is ingenious, able to build a lab in a slum with a box of scraps. Quickly, we get a strong impression of Bruce's core characteristics. And this goes beyond basic things like level of intelligence. We get to see where Bruce stands morally. When one of the tough guys is harassing Martina, Bruce attempts to walk away. That's the smart thing to do. Getting in the middle of someone else's conflict is a sure way to draw unwanted attention. However, Bruce can't stop himself from intervening. His desire to help Martina is stronger than his instincts for self-preservation. It's a small, simple way to set up a much larger payoff near the end of the movie. Bruce is also cautious. He wears a heart rate monitor to keep track of how close he is to transformation. He also stays off a payroll because it could be used to track him. However, when Bruce is asked to work on a faulty breaker, this happens. This wordlessly communicates the great significance of this event. Bruce is very concerned about not contaminating anything with his blood. It's dangerous.
Goddamn dangerous.
He's careful about everything he does.
Yeah.
And he knows that his body, he's a poison.
Well, his body's lethal.
His body is lethal.
Yeah.
Then why doesn't Bruce wear gloves? Bruce was wearing rubber gloves before being asked to help. He specifically removes them beforehand. This is baffling, as the breaker is clearly sparking and therefore isn't de-energized, which only gives him more reason to keep them on.
Top 5 tips on how to stay safe while working on energized equipment. Gloves don't necessarily have to be super fancy, but something that's going to protect your fingers and hands, which are going to be closest to the energized components.
This contradicts Bruce's cautiousness and intelligence. What's worse are the consequences of this scene. Bruce cleans up the blood, but because he didn't see that the blood drop split in two, he misses one falling into a bottle. This bottle will eventually be shipped to the United States, and will allow General Ross to find him. This is what incites the rest of the plot, but Bruce had no reason to remove his gloves. This both hurts the plot generally and Bruce's character specifically.
He's really taking care of, not getting his out. He's wearing gloves, but you see that before he's getting rid of his gloves. So anyway.
Then why did he take them off? After work, Bruce goes to his apartment and breaks out his laptop and portable internet dish. He opens an encrypted messaging program and talks to someone called Mr. Blue, who refers to Bruce as Mr. Green. A little on the nose, but it works. With Mr. Blue's help, he attempts to create a cure, but it fails. Mr. Blue says they need to meet, but Bruce says it isn't safe. However, he is willing to send him a sample of his blood. There is an implied familiarity between Bruce and Mr. Blue. Mr. Blue's messages have a friendly tone, and when the cure doesn't work, Bruce responds, "Another failure." Mr. Blue has been trying to help Bruce for some time. Also, yes, it is legal to mail blood. Assuming Bruce lied about its level of hazardousness, he would be able to ship it across the US. In Virginia, Ross learns that a man died of gamma sickness after having a drink that was bottled in Brazil.
Milwaukee. A man drank one of those Guarana sodas. Guess it had a little more kick than he was looking for.
This is how they find Bruce. Ross assembles his top men for the mission. This includes Emil Blonsky, or as some might call him,
Blonsky.
Blonsky is described as an ace, implying great accomplishment and skill as a soldier.
Born in Russia, raised in England, and on loan to SOCOM from the Royal Marines.
You might wonder why a British soldier is in the US military. The movie bothers to include this throwaway line to clear up this potential confusion for the audience. It's one example of many that shows this movie's attention to detail.
Is he a fighter?
His first line says a lot about his priorities. Before anything else, he wants to know if there will be a fight. Later, we'll see why.
Your target is a fugitive from the U.S. government and stole military secrets.
This is how they are justifying the manhunt. This either means Ross isn't being entirely honest with the military, or the military is in on the lie. Either way, Ross has intentionally turned an innocent man into a fugitive for a purpose we'll learn later.
Trank him and bring him back.
The transition from the helicopter blades to the fan blades symbolizes the oncoming threat. Like the introduction of the Favela, we are subtly told that Bruce's safety is temporary. Danger approaches, raising the tension. Mr. Blue messages Bruce about blood tests he's performing. We linger on the yes, emphasizing how big of a deal this is to Bruce. This is the one thing he wants more than anything, and Mr. Blue has it. But Mr. Blue needs more data. Bruce says the data is home, while looking at a photo of Betty. To Bruce, Betty represents home. Getting cured means returning to her.
The film starts with Banner, who's on the run from the law, actively looking for a cure. He's wanting to come home.
Bruce's dog alerts him to someone outside, stealing the element of surprise from the soldiers. Even the inclusion of Bruce's dog serves a purpose. Bruce is chased, and he cleverly uses the narrow packed streets to his advantage. This explains how he can outrun elite soldiers.
There's no straight lines. So in essence, if you need to go to A to B, you're going through an alley, you're going on a roof, you're going through a street, you're going into a slum, onto a cobblestone streets. It's endless.
Bruce's heart rate monitor beeps faster and faster. It adds tension by constantly reminding the audience that Bruce is at risk of hulking out. In a crowded place like a favela, that would be a disaster.
It's very important for us to guide the audience in wanting for Banner not to hulk out, not wanting Banner to hulk out. And Brazil is like this. At first you're like, no, don't. You're surrounded by people. No, don't.
Bruce is forced to slow down and calm himself. This reduces the risk of transforming, but increases the risk of getting captured. The tension rises further because he is forced to juggle between these two pressing concerns. Bruce bumps into the tough guys. He uses martial arts to avoid their attacks. This interaction is contrived. He happened to run into these exact people at this exact time. As stated before, favelas are teeming with people. What's also convenient is how Blonsky is in just the right place at the right time to spot them chasing Bruce into the bottling factory. Why does Bruce choose to go in there? Why go into an enclosed space like that? It is relatively secluded, so if he hulks out, he won't hurt so many people. Bruce probably also sees it as a good place to hide and calm down. Bruce is beaten up by the tough guys. When his heart rate monitor hits 200 BPM, he transforms. We now know the exact trigger point of the Hulk. Sadly, the precise BPM of the heart rate monitor isn't focused on again in the movie. It could have been used for creating tension since the audience now knows 200 BPM is the point of no return. The transformation, and Hulk himself, are obscured in darkness. This is a technique usually reserved for horror movies, as the imagination can often conjure images more terrifying than reality.
I wanted to start the movie as a horror movie. I grew up watching Frankenstein and King Kong, and what's great about these movies is that they're monsters to start with. They're absolutely scary.
This represents the fear that Bruce and the soldiers feel towards the Hulk. To them, he is a monster. As Hulk's first seen, we get some good characterization. The tough guys and the soldiers attack him. Hulk batters them away and says, similar to Blonsky, Hulk's first line says a lot about his priorities. The first thing he says in the movie is to tell people attacking him, people who he can swat away like flies, to go away.
He's never looking for trouble, on the contrary. Society is egging it on, and he's trying to stay away so he doesn't harm anybody.
The Hulk does not want to fight. He does so because he is under attack. This is even consistent in the opening montage. Betty's injury is an accident, and it isn't until he's shot at does Hulk attack the others. Blonsky is the last man standing, and is the only one to get a good look at the Hulk's face, after which Hulk escapes. This is meaningful because it's part of the catalyst for Blonsky's obsession with the Hulk, which drives his character arc.
When he's trying to round up the scientist, he catches a glimpse of some huge green kind of monster, and he decides that that's kind of what he wants.
Back at Bruce's apartment, they search through his things. This includes his laptop. You see, Bruce fled with his laptop in his backpack. When the tough guys cornered him in the factory, they took it and tossed it aside. Presumably, Blonsky discovered it after the battle. This is important setup for later.
She helps him, maybe?
They closed that door to him a long time ago. He's alone. He wants to be alone.
Ross's description of Bruce's motives aligns with what Hulk said earlier.
He wants to be alone.
Implying that Bruce and Hulk want the same thing. Ross understands that Bruce has isolated himself for fear of harming others, and to find a cure. He hunts him anyway, implying that their goals are not aligned. At this point, we don't know for certain what Ross's motivations are. It's reasonable to assume that he views the Hulk as a danger to be contained, but there's clearly more going on here.
It's the most powerful thing I've ever seen.
Blonsky is in awe of the Hulk's power.
Well, if Banner knows what it is, I'm gonna track him down. I'm gonna put my foot on his throat and
That was Banner.
So if you're taking another crack at him, I want in.
This is where Blonsky's goals start to shift. Before, he was just a soldier following orders. Now, he's personally invested in the mission. For his own reasons, he wants to face Hulk again. Bruce wakes up in Guatemala and gets a ride from a passerby.
¿A dónde va? A mi hogar.
We understand that by home, he means Betty. He was resistant to the idea before, but in just one terrible night, he's lost 5 months of progress.
It's like the myth of Sisyphus, you know, the guy with the boulder that rolls, over the mountain.
Yeah.
Every time he thinks he's got something, then he transforms into the Hulk and has to go back to zero.
Sisyphus defied the gods by giving humanity immortality. As his punishment, he would push a heavy stone up a mountain, only for it to roll back to the bottom once reaching the top. Sisyphus would be forced to repeat this process for all eternity. Bruce worked hard to set up a life in Brazil and pursue a cure. In one fell swoop, he lost everything, and is forced to start again from scratch. This is emphasized by Days Without Incident dropping to 1. That's where he's starting, at square one. With the loss of all his progress, and Mr. Blue's promise of a cure, Bruce decides to risk returning home for the data. Bruce travels to Chiapas, Mexico. He sits, tired and dejected, and a little boy gives him some money, which he uses to buy clothes. It's a nice touch. They could have cut to Bruce with new clothes without explanation. However, the audience knows that Bruce has lost everything. So, they go out of their way to show how he's able to do something as simple as buy clothes. Bruce has a brief flashback to Blonsky shooting at him from when he was the Hulk. This is intercut with the memory of Betty laying injured after the incident. This evokes PTSD, emphasizing how traumatic the transformation is. It's both physically and mentally draining. More importantly, he associates the Hulk with hurting Betty. This is crucial to understanding Bruce's view of the Hulk, and how that changes by the end of the movie. Due to Blonsky's growing interest, Ross tells him the real reason he's hunting Bruce.
We've got an infantry weapons development program. Well, in WW2, they initiated a sub-program, biotech force enhancement.
Yeah, Super Soldier.
And I dusted it off. Got him doing serious work again, bold work.
Banner's work was very early phase, but he was so sure of what he was onto that he tested it on himself.
As far as I'm concerned, that man's whole body is property of the U.S. Army.
We get some hints at a deeper motivation for Ross.
Tested it on himself. And something went very wrong. Or it went very right.
The experiment led to great damage and injury. This would reflect terribly on Ross, who allowed one of the scientists to act as a test subject. In that sense, it went very wrong. However, it created the Hulk, a being more super than any soldier that's ever existed. In that sense, it went very right. This line of thought will be expanded upon later.
Banner's work was very early phase. It wasn't even weapons application.
There are interesting implications here for Bruce's character.
He thought he was working on radiation resistance. I would never have told him what the project really was.
Ross felt the need to lie to get Bruce into the project. Why?
So why do you run?
He's a scientist. He's not one of us.
Bruce wasn't interested in creating super soldiers. He was interested in making people resistant to radiation, a purpose broader than the military and more focused on purely helping people. Bruce is not a soldier, and isn't interested in creating weapons.
But he was so sure of what he was onto that he tested it on himself.
This implies overconfidence in Bruce, a trait he hasn't displayed in the movie thus far. Keep that in mind. That's one more thing we'll return to.
Blonsky, how old are you? 45?
39.
It takes a toll, doesn't it? So get out of the trenches. You should be a colonel by now.
Nah, I'm a fighter. I'll be one for as long as I can.
Unlike Hulk, Blonsky likes to fight.
And we came up with this idea of a soldier at the end of his career, and that's why he wants the thing. Like, yes, exactly, that's it.
Blonsky desires physical power, and laments how age and wear and tear have weakened him.
Yeah, if I could take what I know now, put it in the body I had 10 years ago, that would be someone I wouldn't want to fight.
I could probably arrange something like that.
That is why the Hulk has caught his interest. He represents power beyond anything he thought possible. This scene leaves me with some questions. Would Bruce normally have been allowed to test on himself? Maybe not. but Ross's presence implies he, the head of the program, allowed it. But why would he? He risks the life of an important scientist. If he dies, the program may die with him.
We're trying other things.
One serum we developed was very promising.
Why was the other serum put on ice? Sure, Ross may consider the Hulk the success he was looking for, but it wouldn't hurt to keep pursuing other options. Bruce arrives at Culver University in Virginia about 16 days later. How did Bruce get from Mexico to Virginia in little over 2 weeks with virtually no resources as a fugitive? It's a shocking jump, especially with how good the movie has been about attention to detail so far. It took the time to explain where Bruce got new clothes, yet completely skips this huge journey. Bruce is unable to get into the building without an ID. He struggles for what to do before focusing on Betty's name. He decides to wait outside until she appears, to turn to her for help. This is where Betty comes into the picture. Thus far, she has only existed in Bruce's memories and regrets. She is what drives his search for a cure, so that he can return to her without fear of hurting her again. He watches from a distance, longingly, only to find that she's with someone, Leonard Samson. Bruce appears heartbroken. He probably believes that Betty has moved on since he left all those years ago. In that case, he decides not to interfere with her life, despite how much he must miss her. Bruce instead goes to a pizzeria. The owner, Stanley, is an old friend of his and Betty's. Stanley offers Bruce a place to sleep, and tells him about Betty's new boyfriend.
Yeah, he's a head shrink, but a really nice guy.
Good. That's good.
Bruce genuinely cares for Betty, so even if it hurts to see her with someone else, he still acknowledges that it's good her new boyfriend is a nice guy. Bruce uses the cover of being a pizza delivery man to gain access to the building. To get into the computer lab, he uses pizza to bribe the security guard, as well as Roger Harrington, who will one day be a teacher at Midtown School of Science and Technology. This is another example of Bruce being clever. During a flashback to the day of the incident, Bruce gives the unhappy Betty a cheeky wink. He is so sure that nothing will go wrong that he acts flippantly.
He's like that, super smart scientist,
Yeah.
and too smart for his own good.
Bruce displays overconfidence, just as Ross alluded to earlier. The only issue I have with this is the lack of exploration. This is it in terms of establishing Bruce's past overconfidence. One line of dialogue and a short moment from a flashback. It's never brought up again. Sort of. Bruce logs into a computer with Betty's credentials. Conveniently, they haven't changed in the years since he's been gone. Usually, you'd be forced to reset your password every few months. Also, why is her username her full name and title? It even has spaces, which no username has. I suspect they wanted it to be obvious that these were Betty's credentials. A random string of numbers and letters wouldn't have communicated that. The data from the experiment is gone. Dejected, Bruce opens an encrypted messaging program to chat with Mr. Blue. Why does the computer have this program? I imagine the university would want to prevent illegal activity from occurring on the computer. And having an untraceable messaging program on them would definitely raise that risk. Could Betty have downloaded it personally? Unlikely. The university would be capable of restricting what programs could be downloaded. However, this contrivance is inconsequential. None of the following events in the movie rely on this short exchange. Bruce tells him the data is gone. Mr. Blue says he can't help him. That's it. At Stanley's, Bruce prepares to go on the run again. Betty and Samson arrive and talk to Stanley. This makes sense, as it was previously stated that Betty is a good friend of his. Betty then sees Bruce walk in on them. Everything but the music goes silent as we focus on Betty's reaction. She immediately stands to follow after Bruce, completely ignoring Samson mid-conversation.
They share so much in their hearts together, so the loss of that, along with an accident of some kind, was just very traumatic. The point that he comes into her life, she's trying to recover from that, I guess, in some way still, and has vaguely moved on, and she thinks she sees a ghost. It's that moment how, when you're in love with someone, you will go into a crowded room and you might see their face for a second because everywhere you turn you see them.
This directorial choice does much to put the audience in Betty's perspective. So far, we've only seen Betty through Bruce's eyes. She was a memory, a regret of his past, something painfully out of reach. Now we see through her eyes, and we find something similar. She feels the same longing for a ghost of her past.
Bruce.
She's not quite moved on like Bruce fears. She confronts Stanley, but we cut away before getting his response. We can guess what he might have said based on events to come, but there will be some confusion. Betty tracks down Bruce, and she begs him not to leave. She cares deeply for him, even after years apart. This love she feels for him will be important in how it affects her perspective of the Hulk. Betty drives him to her house, and they're careful to ensure he remains hidden. She gives him a flash drive with the data he was looking for. She managed to get it before the military confiscated it all. How could she have done this when she was hospitalized at the time? I imagine the military would have acted quickly, especially with Ross's goals.
Does the general know that you have this?
No, I haven't spoken to him in a couple of years.
You have to be sure.
I don't understand why we can't just go in there together and talk to him.
At first, I thought it was overly naive of Betty to think a conversation with Ross could solve this issue. Then I considered that the military story, that Bruce stole military secrets, might not have been what the public has been told.
He told me what he wanted to do. He wants to dissect it so that he can replicate it. He wants to make it a weapon.
She doesn't know that Ross has created this lie, and that he wants to turn Hulk into a weapon. From her perspective, Bruce ran off after the incident for some unknown reason, possibly fear or shame. But we know the public was told something.
Whatever you've heard about me, it's not true.
I always knew it. I mean, you know how I felt about you two.
But what that is remains unknown. I would have liked this to be clearer. It's difficult to know what the average person thinks about this situation. This is particularly important because of Samson's actions a little later. As Bruce explains that Ross wants to turn Hulk into a weapon, we cut to Ross retrieving the experimental Super Soldier Serum to be administered to Blonsky. The implication is clear. Ross sees Blonsky as a potential weapon to be used. This is subtle foreshadowing that, like the Hulk, this experiment of his is also destined to blow up in his face. Bruce insists on leaving in the morning. There is awkwardness in their conversation.
You have everything you need?
Yeah.
They both want to be together, but Bruce is keeping her at a distance. We get a visual symbolizing their longing.
They're both sleeping on the same side of the bed. They should be sleeping on their side of the bed.
And then there's the matter of Betty's boyfriend, Samson. They don't seem to spare him a thought. While it's understandable given their history, it's still kind of shitty.
I love Ty Burrell. He's so great in this movie because he's so good at playing the nice guy that just gets screwed over.
And what happened to Samson after Betty left Stanley's? Given the information he must have received, why wouldn't he go check on Betty at her home? Knowing exactly what Stanley told them might clear this up. As it stands, it's like the movie temporarily forgets about him.
We're giving you a very low dose only. First sign of any side effect, we stop and you're off team until you straighten out.
This is a promise he will fail to keep due to his own motivations.
You'll get 2 separate infusions. One into the deep muscle, one into the bone marrow centers.
That last one looks as painful as a motherfucker. The camera lingers on Blonsky's pained expression. We are shown that Blonsky is willing to endure horrible pain for power. The scene is unpleasant and full of dread. There is no fanfare.
The design of this, I love. This kind of
it's
stuff.
the same thing. It's like, you know, Dr. Frankenstein's lab, you know, it hurts because it looks painful.
Yeah.
The next day, Bruce and Betty go to Culver University to say goodbye. Bruce spots a couple of soldiers preparing an ambush and makes a run for it. Because of this error, Bruce gets the chance to flee, leading to a Hulk out and his escape.
Damn it, we've got snipers on target in 3 more minutes. I want to know who jumped the gun.
This is an important throwaway line. If the military knew that he would be at Culver University in an open area, they could easily set up a sniper to trank him, and Bruce wouldn't have had time to react. This line explains why they were unable to do that. Some may find this too convenient. It's understandable. They don't capture Bruce due to the fuck-up of a couple random soldiers. If Ross or Blonsky had made a mistake that was character-motivated, this sequence would be more earned. Blonsky far outpaces the other soldiers, displaying a great leap in physical prowess.
Yeah, that's Super Run.
This is Super Run, so that's actually you.
Yeah. They put you between these two cranes on cables, and they drop these weights and pull you, and your legs are pumping like crazy, but you're going about 40 miles an hour.
So we drop, and it just sends him. He probably got running about 30, 40 miles an hour at one point.
Usain Bolt, the fastest man in the world, has a recorded top speed of about 27 miles per hour. Blonsky runs 40 miles per hour, without looking the least bit tired. Why is Blonsky not wearing a helmet? The serum wouldn't protect him from a bullet in the head.
Sir, a helmet can interfere with my psychic abilities.
I think a bullet might interfere with them more.
They probably wanted it to be easier for the audience to pick out Blonsky among the other soldiers, so they removed his helmet to individualize him. I think there are more reasonable ways they could have accomplished this.
Blonsky, not yet!
Sir?
Blonsky is eager to face Hulk again, but he still pulls back when Ross orders it. He has his own goals, but he's still a team player. For now. Bruce runs into the building and seizes a moment when he's lost them to swallow the flash drive. He's thinking ahead. If he hulks out, he'll still have the data. Even in the heat of the moment, he can think creatively and intelligently. Betty stands in front of one of the approaching vehicles and shouts for General Ross.
Sir.
Ross, being Betty's father, explains how Betty would know which vehicle he was traveling in. She would have some military knowledge growing up the daughter of a general. More importantly, this reveal recontextualizes previous scenes. General Ross's anger at Bruce in the hospital was the anger of a father at the man who hurt his daughter. It also explains his reaction to seeing Betty's photo in Brazil. This humanizes Ross by hinting at a new layer to his motivations. Ross tries to get Betty in the vehicle, showing that he cares about her safety. Bruce gets trapped in an overpass. They shoot canisters of knockout gas in there with him.
Get her back here!
Ross cares about Betty. He's also obsessed with capturing Bruce. He says,
Get her back here!
Because he cares about her, but is compelled to keep his eyes on Bruce rather than chase after her himself. His attention is split between these two desires. Bruce transforms into the Hulk. It's obscured by smoke, similar to how it was obscured by darkness at the factory. This changes when Hulk bursts from the overpass and is revealed clearly for the first time.
Now she'll see.
Ross wants Betty to see Bruce as the dangerous monster that he sees. But Betty will continuously challenge this point of view. The soldiers open fire, and Hulk fights back. During the ensuing battle, this one vehicle tries to ram itself into Hulk for some reason. Doesn't seem like a very smart plan. Hulk smashes it on a metal statue. I feel with him. I also hate modern art. Ross sends in Blonsky. As he shoots, Hulk tears off pieces of the statue to use as makeshift shields and weapons. Ross is amazed to see Blonsky fight Hulk and not get squashed immediately. Blonsky is able to lead Hulk towards a couple sound cannons, where he gets caught in a sonic trap. The sound cannons disorient Hulk and place immense physical pressure on him.
Please get back!
Hulk likely interprets Betty's cries as her being in danger, so Hulk forces himself to stand and keep fighting. The thing that motivates him to fight, even more than self-defense, is the need to defend someone he cares about. Betty's feelings for Bruce have extended to Hulk. Even with the destruction, she still views him as Bruce. And it is this care that encourages Hulk to not give up, indicating that there is truth in her perspective. Hulk uses one of the metal pieces to shield himself against the sonic waves, allowing him to stand. He aims and throws the other piece, destroying one of the cannons. He then jumps free and destroys the other. Blonsky starts shooting Hulk again.
Is that it?
Blonsky, pull back now.
This is the first time Blonsky has disobeyed Ross's orders.
Is that all you got?
Why does Blonsky confront Hulk like this? What does he think will happen? Is the idea that Blonsky has gotten high off his new powers and is overestimating his abilities? He did win the last confrontation they had, but here he just taunts Hulk and takes a kick from him. Did he think he would be quick enough to dodge it? Because, he was wrong. Hulk kicks Blonsky hard. He flies face first into a tree and collapses into a bloody, broken mess. They cut away from the initial strike and obscure Blonsky's face after impacting the tree. This serves to imply greater brutality than one might have felt if these events were shown normally. It's as if the act is so violent, they can't even show you directly. The mess that has become of Blonsky is greater in the imagination of the audience. That leads nicely into one aspect of the movie I'd like to talk about: how it portrays the consequences of violence. The movie goes out of its way to show the impact of violent action in a relatively realistic way. When Betty elbows a soldier in the face, we are shown his bloody nose. I don't think anyone would have thought twice if the soldier appeared unaffected the next time we saw him. But realistically, getting an elbow in the face can easily lead to a broken nose. Even the more fantastical elements are given the same weight. The sound cannon trap is depicted as to effectively convey Hulk's pain. His skin and muscles ripple against the pressure, and he covers his ears against the piercing, high-pitched warbling of the sonic blast.
We always reminded people that it has to be reality-based.
Yeah, we have to believe. And Ed was the same. Supposing this is real, then how do you...
Absolutely, yeah. Look at that. Look at his... Look at the jeans. Look at the ripples in his skin. I really wanted to be as painful to the audience as it is for the Hulk. So literally the sound kills your ears.
This is especially important given the conflict of the movie. Bruce fears how the Hulk destroys and harms. For the audience to be invested in this, the consequences of the Hulk's violence must be meaningful. This also ties into creating stakes. You can't fear for a character's life if they're arbitrarily immune to the consequences of violence. General Ross orders everyone to fall back. Betty approaches Hulk. At the same time, Ross orders the gunship to open fire. This is a major contrivance. Why did the soldiers just let Betty walk up to the Hulk? Why did Ross just let Betty walk up to the Hulk? Are we supposed to believe not one of them was paying attention? All of them are focused on bringing down the Hulk, and Betty just walks straight towards the Hulk. And no one noticed? One of Ross's primary motivations is protecting Betty, yet it's like she ceases to exist. I mean, come on. The soldiers holding Betty just vanish between cuts. What the fuck? Another major contrivance is that the gunship is positioned perfectly to not be able to see Betty standing in front of the Hulk. Because if it had seen Betty, there's no way it would have fired. If either of these contrivances hadn't occurred, Betty's involvement in the rest of the story changes drastically. Samson arrives and watches what happens next. The gunship fires and Hulk shields Betty. When Ross finally realizes Betty is out there, he orders the gunship to stop. Hulk uses one of the pieces of metal to bring it down, shielding Betty from the explosion. No! Ross is distraught when he thinks Betty might have been killed, dispelling any doubt about his care for her. This is important, because his gruff exterior and estranged relationship with Betty might have made the audience doubt his feelings for her. Hulk emerges with an unconscious Betty, glaring at Ross, who watches in shock. Hulk then fades away into the smoke. This makes it clear to the audience, and more importantly, to Ross, that Hulk cares about Betty's safety, and even blames Ross for putting her in danger.
Ross hasn't saved Betty, Hulk has. Hulk is a hero now.
At Betty's house, soldiers leave with files and boxes, likely gathering evidence to track down Bruce.
You did the right thing calling.
We can assume Samson learned of Bruce when Betty confronted Stanley. It seems that after she ran off, Samson decided to notify the military. As I stated before, it's unclear what the average person knows about the incident and Bruce's on-the-run status. And therefore, it's unclear what Stanley said. If Betty didn't know that Bruce is accused of stealing military secrets, Stanley, and therefore Samson, certainly didn't. Then what does Samson believe? He may only know that Bruce is someone on the run from the military, which would be enough to raise his concerns. He may have feared for Betty's well-being, supported by Ross's assurance that he'll keep her safe. Then why didn't the military or Samson go to Betty's home to check on her? The military was fast enough to set up an ambush at Culver University, but they couldn't have tried sniping Bruce through the window of Betty's house? You could infer the following. They did monitor Betty's house for Bruce, and deliberately told Samson not to go there. But they couldn't get a good shot at Bruce because he and Betty were too careful. They might have then assumed Bruce would try to flee via bus, so they would try to set up an ambush at Culver University. But none of this is ever stated. A throwaway line would have gone a long way to smooth out these events. And now I wonder why Bruce and Betty went to Culver University in the first place. It's a high-risk location given that Bruce used to work there. Were there no other places Bruce could have gotten on a bus? I don't know.
Should be an incredible danger as long as she's with him.
From who? He protected her. You almost killed her.
Ross has to grapple with the fact that the dangerous monster he was trying to get Betty away from protected her while he could not.
I give you my word, her safety is my main concern at this point.
It's a point of professional pride with me that I can always tell when somebody's lying. And you are.
Because of his reaction earlier, we know Ross does care for Betty. So this line from Samson serves to reinforce how General Ross is conflicted between his hunt for the Hulk and his desire to protect Betty. Ross has prioritized capturing Hulk over keeping his daughters safe.
That is the biggest problem with war, is not just the pain and suffering that it causes on the day, but the pain and suffering that is the legacy of war. And I see Thunderbolt as being a lot about that, the warping of his compassion as a human being. And the odd and wonderful irony that Stan Lee wrote into the comic is this juxtaposition between Ross, the arm of society, and this so-called monster in whose hide there lurks a wonderful conscience. One that's better able to take care of Thaddeus's daughter than Thaddeus himself.
But I must stress that the only reason Betty was almost killed was due to several contrivances. Hulk takes shelter in a cave. Throughout the previous action sequence, Betty appeared shocked and horrified at the Hulk's rage and power. However, she still empathizes with him.
Please, please get back!
And despite the extreme change in behavior and appearance, she still recognizes him as Bruce. This view seems validated when Hulk attempts to defend her from the thunder and lightning, mistaking them for an enemy. He wants to keep her safe, just as Bruce does, and he seems to recognize and trust Betty. The next day, Bruce and Betty make their way to a small-town motel. Bruce coughs up the flash drive and Betty buys some supplies. Later, Bruce makes a big deal about not using credit cards since they can be traced, but here he doesn't comment on it. And since they aren't tracked down yet, I can only assume Betty happened to use cash.
Further search for the mysterious Hulk was postponed by powerful thunderstorms in the Smoky Mountain National Forest.
This connects with the previous scene set during a storm and explains how Hulk was able to evade the chasing military. And this storm was set up previously. It was raining the night Betty found Bruce, and when they arrived at Culver University, the sky was cloudy with thunder. The storm doesn't come out of nowhere to aid in their escape. It's properly set up. Betty gives Bruce a haircut, during which they share a tender moment. It's a glimpse into the loving relationship they once had. Betty starts kissing his cheek, and then there's an abrupt cut to them standing face to face. It's a jarring edit that momentarily takes me out of the movie. Maybe it's supposed to suggest some time has passed? That didn't come across to me. It feels more like there was a scene cut.
Wait. We can't do this. I can't get too excited.
Not even a little excited.
Even sex, a core part of a romantic relationship, has been robbed from Bruce. The tragic implications are that so long as the Hulk lurks within him, Bruce can never have a family. He can never have a normal life. This conveys Bruce's tragedy more explicitly to the audience. Not that kind of explicit. The scene serves as an example of what Bruce has lost due to the Hulk. It can be more impactful to see it in real-time character interactions, rather than only being told verbally or through memory fragments. After the battle, Blonsky's looking worse for wear.
Most of the bones in his body look like crushed gravel right now. I will say this for him. He's got a heart like a machine.
Yet even in this state, he still displays the will to fight. Over what seems to be a few days, Blonsky makes a miraculous recovery. He may not be as powerful as the Hulk, but he still evolved beyond a normal human.
How do you feel?
Pissed off. I'm ready for round 3.
After his defeat at Hulk's hands, or foot in this case, he's left angry and vengeful. Blonsky wanted strength like the Hulk. Now he wants to prove he's stronger than the Hulk.
Let's even the playing field a little.
And he'll endure another dose of Super Soldier Serum to prepare.
We can't use any of this, because they can track all of it.
Well, my lip gloss, can they track that?
You can take your lip gloss.
Thank you.
Well, you can take your glasses and your watch, okay? We can use most of it. We just can't use the credit cards, the ID, or the phone.
I find this exchange strange. Bruce starts at one extreme, receives a minimal pushback, then immediately jumps to the other extreme. Maybe it's meant to be comedic. If so, that intention did not come through for me. They need money. Betty suggests selling her necklace.
No, that's the only thing you have left from her. No.
We'll have to try and get it back.
The her they're referring to is probably Betty's mother, who is nowhere to be seen in the movie. This implies she died some time ago, and Betty only has the necklace to remember her by. The necklace was seen briefly in a prior scene, but this is the first time they've drawn any attention to it. This moment lacks weight, because they're forced to give up this significant item in the same scene we learn the item has any significance at all. They skipped the setup and went straight to the payoff. It's cheap.
We just can't use the credit cards, the ID, or the phone.
Don't most places require an ID to sell or pawn an item? Bruce uses the computer at a gas station to email Mr. Blue the data. What gas station has a public computer? The military intercepts it while searching for the use of the aliases Mr. Blue and Mr. Green. They got those back in Brazil, when they recovered his laptop. This is a major payoff for that earlier setup. The military learns of Mr. Blue's true identity, and that he works at Grayburn College in New York. They now know where Bruce is headed. This is rash of Bruce. Earlier, he sent his blood in the mail, but with a physical package, it's more difficult for an organization like S.H.I.E.L.D. to discover its significance and search its contents. There are algorithms that can search the internet for specific terms. There's no easy way to search all the mail in the US.
If he makes a peep, we'll hear him. And when he slips up, we'll be ready.
He feels safe and he makes a mistake. He sends an email and S.H.I.E.L.D. Intercepts that message.
This at least confirms that the movie intends for Bruce's actions to be rash. The question now is, would Bruce be so reckless in this situation? Bruce doesn't know that the military recovered his laptop. Because of the Hulk out, he likely believes it was destroyed. As far as he's concerned, the email has no reason to attract unwanted attention. On top of that, Bruce has no access to the usual encryption program he uses. He doesn't have much of a choice if he wants to send the data to Mr. Blue. Add to this that Bruce may feel pressured to act quickly. While in the US, he's at higher risk of getting caught, and Mr. Blue has become his only hope at finding a cure.
I wanted a ticking clock. I really wanted this movie to be a ticking clock. Is he gonna make it? Is he gonna get cured? Is he gonna, are you gonna catch him before? Are you gonna transform before? And that adds tension. I think it really worked.
You can argue whether this desperation would be enough for Bruce to take this risk. But this then begs another question. Why not wait until getting to New York to hand Mr. Blue the data in person? Wouldn't that be safer? From a plot progression perspective, They need a way for the military to track where Bruce is headed so the third act can happen. But does the story sufficiently justify it? One reason I can think of that Bruce would do this is the fear of staying in the US too long. He sends the data ahead of time so that the cure can be administered as soon as he arrives. No downtime, and less chance of the military catching up to him. He might also fear losing the data on the way. He only saved it the first time by foreseeing a Hulk out and seizing a moment when he was hidden. Who knows if he'd be so lucky the next time? If he can get Mr. Blue the data ASAP, Bruce can be assured that a cure will be made despite what happens to him on the journey there. So, would Bruce reasonably send this sensitive data via email? I lean towards yes, but I think there's room for debate. Besides the question of would Bruce send the data, I have to ask if he even could. This is all the data concerning the radiation resistance research Bruce and Betty were working on. I imagine that's a lot of data. Bruce is using Outlook, which lets you send files up to 20 megabytes. Files can be compressed to 10% of their size without losing anything. So if the data was only a single gigabyte, the file would still be a whopping 100 megabytes. Impossible to send by email. Any way you slice this scene, you've got problems. With the money from the necklace, they buy a truck and drive to New York.
Do you remember anything?
Just fragments. There's too much noise. I can never derive anything out of it.
But then it's still you inside it.
No, it's not.
In the cave, I really felt like it knew me.
Bruce denies that he and Hulk are the same. Remember, he associates Hulk with hurting Betty. He doesn't want to believe that they are the same, because what might that say about him?
He has gone to Brazil to be in exile because he's so ashamed and hurt by what he's done by becoming the Hulk.
Maybe your mind is in there. It's just overcharged and can't process what's happening.
I don't want to control it. I want to get rid of it.
Hulk isn't even a person. He's an it, an incident to be avoided. No good can come from Hulk.
You don't understand the power of this thing. It is too dangerous. It cannot be controlled.
Due to her love for Bruce, Betty is able to see the humanity in Hulk that Bruce refuses to acknowledge. Here, despite his denial, she plants that idea in Bruce's mind. They approach New York and find that cars are being stopped for roadwork. However, the police presence raises Bruce's suspicions. They abandon the truck and hire a boat into the city. The implication is that the military are using the New York police force to search for Bruce, without immediately tipping him off. Why would they have police checking the bridges but not the water? Did they not consider Bruce would enter by boat? Or is it simply not feasible to watch the water traffic? I'm afraid I don't know enough about how New York handles its water traffic to make any definitive conclusions. They opt to take a taxi to Grayburn College instead of the subway, as they judge it to be safer and less stressful. The driver, however, turns out to be a fucking maniac.
Breathe, breathe.
Are you out of your mind?
I know a few techniques could help you manage that anger very effectively.
You zip it.
This is one of the few instances of Bruce telling a joke. We have seen very little humor from Bruce during his time alone and on the run.
What? They were the stretchiest pair they had.
I'll take my chances.
This light-hearted aspect of his character only appears after he reconnects with Betty. I think this indicates how she brings out Bruce's true self. It's a side of him that he lost when he lost her.
They share so much in their hearts together, but also in their work together, and they just are the best of friends and share so much together. So the loss of that, along with an accident of some kind, was just very traumatic.
They meet Mr. Blue, Samuel Stearns, at Grayburn College. Until now, our only exposure to Stearns was his messages to Bruce. They characterized him as friendly and charismatic, so the audience already has a general idea of what kind of person he is. This helps Stearns feel like an already established character, despite this technically being his first appearance. Stearns explains the cure he's developed. There's a chance it will only suppress a single instance of transformation and not be permanent.
We're dealing with concentrations with extraordinary levels of toxicity, so...
You mean it could kill him?
You should know that there's a flip side to this, too. If we induce me, and it fails, This will be very dangerous for you.
I've always been more curious than cautious, and that served me pretty well. Are we gonna do this?
Stearns is willing to risk his own life to conduct this experiment. This might indicate selflessness. He will risk his safety to help Bruce. However, as we'll see shortly, his motivations aren't nearly so altruistic. We cut to Blonsky staring at himself in the mirror. He appears sickly and his spine unnaturally protrudes from his back.
How you feeling, man?
Like a monster.
The shift in his character is accentuated by a shift in his appearance. This also foreshadows a more dramatic change soon to come. In Stearns' lab, they prepare Bruce to receive the cure. It needs to be administered while Bruce is transformed, so Stearns induces a Hulk out by shocking him. We then get to see the Hulk transformation clearly, in full, for the first time. Stearns is unable to look away. Even after getting injured, he is so in awe that he tries to touch Hulk. Betty has to remind Stearns to administer the cure. This is also ironic, given that at the start of the procedure, he told Betty,
"I take your hands off him."
He forgets his own rational advice when witnessing a scientific marvel. Aside from the opening montage, Bruce has transformed into Hulk 3 times in the movie.
But I wanted like the first one to be different than the rest.
Yeah.
More like the Ghost in the Darkness. I grew up watching Frankenstein and King Kong, and what's great about these movies is that they're monsters to start with, and at the end of the movie you can't wait for them to come back because they already appeared. They're the heroes. They're like the monsters with a big heart.
Sure.
The first Hulk out did not show us the transformation, and did not give a clear view of Hulk. It served to introduce us to Hulk as a character, and what he's capable of.
One of the things we felt like we wanted to do was not blow out the Hulk too much too early. So Louis used to talk about, he called it like the ghost in the darkness,
You don't want to give everything to the audience at first. You want to hold back as much as you can.
And you catch glimpses of them, and the soldiers don't really know what's going on, and the bullies sure as heck don't know what's going on. And the audience begins to see the Hulk in and around the shadows.
The second Hulk out did not show us the transformation, but did give us a clear view of Hulk in action.
Act 1's the ghost in the darkness. It's kind of a horror film. Act 2 is the full-on, in the daylight, knockdown, drag-out brawl.
We explored his character further and saw his interactions with other important characters. This third Hulk out finally shows us the transformation. We see in painful detail how traumatic it is. It's brutal. His bones expand and snap into place. His skin darkens to green, and Bruce cries out in agony. Each time Bruce turns into the Hulk, the audience is given something new, be it characterization, spectacle, or contribution to theme. This can help keep the transformation from becoming monotonous. It can create a sense of anticipation for the next one, and fuel audience engagement. Hulk receives the cure and transforms back into Bruce.
That was the most extraordinary thing I have seen in my entire life.
Stearns rambles off an interesting scientific explanation for the Hulk, which I explore in more detail in another video.
It's hard to know because none of our test subjects ever survived. But of course, they weren't getting the primer.
What did you just say? What test subjects?
Come with me.
We discover that Stearns has been conducting animal testing with Bruce's blood.
You do worry about the sanity of, or start to question the sanity of the guy that he's been trusting.
He explains.
This gamma technology has limitless applications. We'll unlock hundreds of cures.
We've got to destroy it.
We could get the Nobel for this.
You don't understand the power of this thing. It is too dangerous. It cannot be controlled.
We have the antidote now.
They don't want the antidote. They want to make it a weapon.
Stearns is motivated to help Bruce and risk his life in pursuit of glory and great accomplishment.
Promethean fire!
In mythology, Prometheus stole fire from the gods and gave it to humanity, leading to their great advancement of civilization. But Zeus punished Prometheus by tying him to a stone so an eagle could eat his liver, only for it to grow back and be eaten again the next day, and the next, and the next. Bruce, intentionally or not, acquired an incredible power that has the potential to advance human civilization by leaps and bounds. However, as punishment for getting this power, he is cursed. He hurts those around him and is separated from the woman he loves. He travels to someplace remote, sets up a new life, and searches for a cure, only for it all to end in disaster and failure. He then is forced to move on and try again, and again, and again.
Hulk is like the Prometheus, right? The guy who steals fire from the gods. And that's how I thought about it. I was like, if we could do something like that, this guy who thinks he's going for something good that's going to help humanity, and he cracks open the backside of God and takes something out that is not meant to be taken out, and now he's cursed, alone in the world and cursed.
Bruce is shot with a tranq by a sniper. At the same time, Blonsky rushes towards them, even against Ross's orders.
Blonsky, stand down. My daughter's in there.
When he enters, he tosses Betty aside and tries to force Bruce to transform.
Show him to me.
For the second time, Blonsky disobeys Ross's orders. He even injures his daughter and directly interferes with the mission. His lust for power and obsession with the Hulk have eroded his restraint and loyalty. He serves only his self-interests now.
Take this.
Ah yes, blankets. The perfect remedy for getting flung face first into a glass cabinet.
I will never forgive what you've done to him. You made him a fugitive to cover your failures and to protect your career.
This implies the incident tarnished Ross's military career, so he dedicated everything to capturing Bruce and making Hulk the super soldier they were striving for, to make up for his failure and protect his career. This supports my interpretation of Ross's earlier line.
And something went very wrong. Or it went very right.
I wish this aspect of his character had been expanded on further. We know that Ross wanted to turn Hulk into a weapon, but the reasoning behind this has not been clear. If this selfish desire to make up for his failures had been made more explicit and had been explored more depth would be added to Ross's motivations. It would also help flesh out his character arc.
Don't ever speak to me as your daughter again.
It's only because you're my daughter that you're not in handcuffs, too.
You see, Betty tears down Ross's two main motivations. He wants to capture Bruce. Betty reminds him that it's only to cover up his failures. Ross wants to protect Betty. Her injury is his fault, and she is so upset with him that she doesn't even wish to be his daughter anymore. Ross is primed for his lowest moment. But this is weakened by the lack of exploration for one of these motivations. In the lab, Major Spar interrogates Stearns.
He was a freak accident. The goal is to do it better.
So Banner's the only one to...
Why are you always hitting people?
What you got to have Banner, I want that.
Listening in on their conversation, Blonsky realizes that Stearns is capable of replicating the Hulk. Blonsky's obsession with power has driven him to disobey orders, hurt civilians, and now attack his commanding officer. But why is Blonsky in this room anyway? I would imagine with his level of disobedience, he would have been put under lock and key. Unless we're supposed to assume he escaped. Later, when Abomination bursts from the building, one of the soldiers says,
Blonsky the Major is still inside!
Implying that he was supposed to be there, and wasn't locked up at all, which I find hard to believe.
You look like you've got a little something in you already, don't you?
I don't think there's a better display of Stearns' character than this. He is so taken by his scientific curiosity that he seems to forget there's a gun in his face.
You've seen what he becomes, right?
I have. And it's beautiful. Godlike.
Need that. Make me that.
I think Blonsky's lust for power can be aptly compared to an addiction.
But you were afraid. You were like, you think we can do Junkie, Marvel, and everything? I was like,
yeah,
this is great.
This is Junkie 4.
This is like super Junkie.
Yeah,
like,
we're getting there now.
Like, actually, that's why I'm not cutting away, because I love it.
Blonsky forces Stearns to give him the power of the Hulk. Stearns does so by injecting him with Bruce's blood and exposing him to the same gamma radiation. I'm curious what this mutation will do to Stearns, both in terms of ability and personality. I'm sure we'll follow up on this. Eventually. Please? There is nice attention to detail with the glass of Bruce's blood. It says strength 14.56%, indicating that it's been heavily diluted. This explains why Stearns and Blonsky don't just die when getting it into their systems. The movie has made a big deal about the toxicity of Bruce's blood, so it's nice they addressed it. Blonsky becomes the Abomination and goes on a rampage. We follow the perspective of a group of soldiers reacting to the situation. A shaky camera struggles to keep track of Abomination as he bounds across rooftops and charges through cars.
This is exactly what it would feel like if something like this was happening in your city. You'd be like, what the hell is happening?
What's going on?
This technique was similarly used for Hulk to convey the terror that comes from facing such a powerful creature. Although I don't think it's as effective here, it has less build-up and we already have a frame of reference in Hulk. The helicopter that Ross, Betty, and Bruce are taking out of the city gets contacted about the destruction.
Oh my god, who the fuck is that?
Booyah!
It may seem strange that as soon as he becomes Abomination, he goes on a seemingly mindless rampage. But there's a logic to it. He has just been granted this new godlike power, so he's testing it out. He wants to see just how strong he's become.
This is really character-defining stuff.
Yes.
He's enjoying himself.
Yeah.
We understand why he's doing that. Not because he wants to get to something. He's on a rampage. He's just testing
playing
the machine, you know.
Yeah,
Just...
let's see what I can do.
This is the final step in Blonsky's moral degradation.
Give me a real fight!
This is a challenge directed at Hulk. Abomination makes a show with the rocket to demonstrate that he's beyond anything a normal person is capable of dealing with. If they want to stop him, they'll have to send in Hulk, and he will finally get his rematch and the chance to prove that he's the strongest.
Tell them to bring everything they've got and head for Harlem.
It has to be me.
There's nothing more that Ross can do except fall upon the same tactics that have failed to capture Hulk in the past. When Bruce sees this, he immediately knows what he must do. Hulk is the only thing that can stop Abomination.
You have to take me back there.
What are you saying? You think you can control it?
No, not control it, but I don't know, maybe aim it.
For the first time, he considers that Hulk could be used to help people, not hurt them.
Bruce sees what's happening, knows that the military can't do anything about it. For the first time in the movie, he's going to take the chance to willingly bring the Hulk out of him to face this creature.
I believe Bruce has tentatively come to accept Betty's view of Hulk. He and Hulk are the same, and since they are the same, Hulk will not abide by someone hurting innocent people. I wish it was made clearer that Bruce has come to this conclusion partly because of Betty. Prior to this scene, he was convinced Hulk was nothing but a monster, with Betty being the only one to push back against this idea. This scene doesn't address this. In fact, Betty argues against Bruce going to face Abomination. Mind you, this isn't out of character for her. She cares for Bruce and doesn't want him to get killed. But it does obscure the role she's played in bringing Bruce to this decision in the first place. I don't think this scene adequately emphasizes Betty's contribution to Bruce's character arc, although you might argue it doesn't need to.
You think you can control it?
No, not control it, but I don't know, maybe aim it.
And what if you can't?
We made this thing. All of us.
I think it's interesting that Bruce chooses to share in the responsibility of Abomination's creation. And it's true to a certain extent. Ross is responsible because he gave Blonsky the Super Soldier Serum and kept him around even though he promised to remove him if any side effects emerged. However, Bruce is also responsible. It was Bruce's overconfidence that led him to recklessly experiment on himself, creating the Hulk in the first place. The Hulk was this new power, this Promethean fire, that he had unwittingly unleashed upon the world. And now this power has ended up in the hands of a man like Blonsky, which is the last thing he ever wanted.
What Blonsky becomes is the embodiment of what Banner doesn't want to have happen, which is for this thing inside of him to be turned into a weapon. And yet, the only thing that they can put up against it is the equal and opposite force in a way, which is Hulk.
Bruce expresses this to Ross to convince him to let Hulk face Abomination. He is asking for a chance to amend a wrong he contributed to. It's a tactically smart way to approach the situation. Bruce could have doubled down on blaming Ross for causing this disaster, but that runs the risk of angering Ross and turning the man against him completely. Instead, Bruce chooses to humble himself and take some of the burden off of Ross's shoulders. This makes Ross more open to hearing him out.
Land us near it.
No, keep us high. Open the back door.
Ross agrees to Bruce's idea. There are multiple factors contributing to this decision. Ross has seen firsthand that Hulk values the lives of the innocent, particularly Betty. So, monster or no, he would have an interest in stopping Abomination. On top of that, this scene occurs shortly after Betty accused Ross of being haunted by his failures. If the Hulk is a failure, then the Abomination is a failure that eclipses it. Not only is Blonsky a giant rage monster, unlike Hulk, he actively enjoys hurting others. Ross will want to do all he can to rectify this. And throughout the movie, Ross has been torn between his want to protect Betty and his want to capture the Hulk. Prioritizing the latter caused him to fail in the former, and earned him Betty's contempt. So, he makes a different decision here. He decides the safety of the innocent, the safety of Betty, is more important than his self-interests. After 5 years of obsessively hunting the Hulk, and finally succeeding, Ross chooses to let him go. Like with Bruce, Betty has played a significant role in Ross's character arc, though I think her contribution is clearer in this case. Bruce goes to jump out the back of the helicopter.
You don't even know if you'll change.
Betty, I've got to try.
He makes a literal leap of faith. He doesn't know if the cure was permanent, so this may kill him.
Good stuff. He thinks he's cured. It was always important because
it's kind of almost there, isn't it? He's almost there.
Well, he's there. He thinks that's it. His trouble is behind.
He's willing to give up his happiness and risk his life to defend others. It's a trait of his seen all the way back in Brazil when he chose to help Martina over keeping a low profile.
He turns into the hero here. He might be cured. He doesn't know. He might transform. He might be cured.
But now he has to bring him back.
Well, he has to bring him back. That's the real sacrifice.
Bruce plummets to the ground, and Hulk emerges from the rubble. Like a phoenix, he is reborn from the ashes. Maybe that's a stretch. Hulk and Abomination charge at one another. Hulk gets tackled, tossed, and dazed, showing that Abomination is stronger.
The problem with Hulk is that he's so powerful that nothing can hurt him until, you present them with a real enemy, somebody who's as strong, maybe a little stronger, and also who's vicious and wants to hurt. Now you have a problem.
We had to create a character that was dominant to Hulk in almost every way.
I'd like to briefly discuss the differences in design between the two. Hulk is made to look distinctly human.
I wanted something really human. I wanted something really uber-human.
If you look at the television series, it was, of course, Lou Ferrigno, basically, 6 feet tall. If you look at the Ang Lee film, he was upwards of 15 feet tall, which I think in hindsight we think is a little too big. The separation between Hulk and humans is much too great there. So we firmly establish him as 9 feet tall in this film.
Abomination is made to look distinctly inhuman. Not that inhuman.
With Hulk, you can take a human and you can use them as reference. For Abomination, you can only do that to a certain extent, and then you've got to go off into crazy land.
But one of the major things that they told us was Abomination's this guy who's exploded out of his skin and his bones and muscles are, visible.
Upon gaining this power, Bruce is transformed into something godlike, yet still recognizably human. Blonsky, however, is transformed into something monstrous. He's bigger than Hulk. His bones stick out of his body in unsettling, unnatural ways. He's lost all his hair, giving him this freaky Goomba-looking head. And most horrific of all,
you don't have genitalia. Let's talk about that.
Symbolically, you might say, their appearances reflect what is at the heart of each man. Bruce has a selfless desire to help others, so he becomes a super person with the strength to help people. Blonsky is addicted to power and wants to hurt others, so he becomes the monster he is deep down.
The Hulk is a steel ball. The Abomination is a cubic triangle. How does a steel ball fight a cubic triangle?
I mean, now that I see what you're doing, I understand. I mean, T and talking about, he's more of a triangle and he's more of a ball.
Seeing that Abomination is tougher than him, Hulk smashes a car down the middle and uses both ends as makeshift boxing gloves. Now his punches do more damage, and he's able to get a momentary upper hand. Throughout the movie, Hulk has shown himself to be surprisingly clever. At Culver University, he turned 2 torn pieces of metal into shields and weapons, which he used to fight against Blonsky and escape the sound cannons. Here, he does something similar. Contrary to popular belief, Hulk isn't just a dumb rage monster that knows how to punch hard and little else. He can assess a battle and utilize the environment to overcome obstacles. Like Bruce, he possesses ingenuity. I'd like to compare this scene to the scene at the cave. There, Hulk misunderstood the storm for an enemy, which tells us that he lacks knowledge. He doesn't understand what lightning and thunder are. Yet, he displays clear ingenuity. In D&D terms, he has high wisdom but low intelligence.
Give him some help! Which one? Help the green one, damn it! Which one do you think cut the other one in half?
Aren't they both green, though? If I were given this instruction, I wouldn't know which one he was talking about. The minigun rains fire on Abomination, and this is an incredibly stupid thing for them to do. Just how many civilians were killed in this reckless fire? Did the movie forget that these buildings have actual people in them? The reason they've decided to do this is because the movie needs the helicopter to catch Abomination's attention, so he can retaliate against it, putting Betty in danger, and motivating Hulk. This is also a clear way to show how Ross has changed as a character. Not only has he let Hulk go, but now he's actively helping him. But this makes Ross appear uncharacteristically incompetent. Abomination leaps at the helicopter, and Hulk makes a grab to stop him. The helicopter crashes onto the rooftop of an abandoned courthouse, killing and injuring the people within. Betty is relatively unhurt, and goes to help the injured Ross.
Let me help you.
Even though she told him never to think of her as his daughter again, she instinctively calls him Dad. Perhaps she appreciates his willingness to listen to Bruce, or perhaps seeing him injured made her forget her anger. I think it's a little of both. The crash is treated with appropriate weight. People die. However, Betty coming out nearly unscathed seems unlikely given the damage dealt to those around her. It's convenient that this important character just so happened to survive. Hulk's expression conveys reluctance and weariness, but then he growls and rage returns before jumping back into battle. Hulk doesn't like fighting, but he will fight to protect others.
You don't deserve this power.
Abomination revels in the destruction he's capable of. He sees Hulk's reluctance for violence as a waste. Hulk has godlike power, yet he refuses to use it to its fullest potential. Abomination is dominating the fight, and it looks like Hulk will lose. But when Hulk looks at the helicopter, he realizes it's on the verge of being engulfed in flames, and that Betty is in danger. Similar to his battle against the sound cannons, he finds new strength. This is emphasized by the change in Hulk's eye color, something strongly associated with the state of his transformation. He pries away Abomination and goes to Betty's rescue. This moment acts as a response to Abomination's claim. While Abomination uses his power for a cruel, selfish purpose, Hulk uses his power for a righteous, selfless purpose. From a moral perspective, he has earned his power, while Abomination hasn't. This is why, even though Abomination starts out stronger, Hulk is still able to overcome him. And this also makes sense in the story. We've already seen that Hulk gains determination and strength to overcome obstacles when Betty is in danger. As the helicopter fuel catches fire, Hulk claps his hands, creating a wave of pressure that snuffs it out. Another clever play by Hulk, probably his greatest display of ingenuity.
General, any last words? Hulk smash!
This series of events comes off as awkward as fuck to me. The line,
"Any last words?"
is so cliche that I'm put off hearing it come from Abomination's mouth. I don't know why Blonsky would even care about getting Ross's last words. It's only there to set up Hulk's response, which is one of Hulk's iconic catchphrases. But I don't think it suits this version of the character. Hulk's first line of dialogue is... It's absent of the Hulk's trademark grammatical errors, and is evidence of a character who dislikes violence. It's strange for that sort of character to yell a catchphrase about smashing in broken English. don't believe the laws of physics would allow this. And anyway, I don't think this is something Hulk would do. Rather than yell a catchphrase, smash the ground, and wait patiently for the path of the crack to reach Abomination, I think he'd just tackle him. Much quicker and less risky that way. And then there's the unbelievably convenient path of the chain. Not only does it miss the people Hulk is defending, but it comes back down and hits Abomination. This moment isn't earned. The idea seems to be that Hulk doesn't need to be a monster, but I don't think killing Abomination would make him one. Abomination is extremely powerful and extremely dangerous. It's unclear if there exists a way of containing him, as we've seen the military try and fail to contain Hulk throughout the movie. Killing Abomination might be the only sensible option given the circumstances. Also, Hulk has killed before, and the movie doesn't seem to think those deaths were entirely unjustified. They were done in self-defense and in the defense of others, just like this kill would be. Soldiers and police arrive on the scene to find Abomination defeated, and for the first time, the world sees Hulk as a hero. You know, it'd be really weird if the people of Harlem acted like this event never happened. Could you imagine that? Ross motions for the soldier next to him to lower his gun, and he doesn't stop Betty from approaching Hulk. Now that Abomination has been stopped, and Ross has gotten what he wants, there is the possibility for him to walk back his decision to let Hulk go. Yet, he commits to his choice, solidifying his character arc. A searchlight shines on Hulk, and he takes it as his cue to leave.
He's free, I mean, he's in control, and that was important to show that in one long, swifting shot.
We cut to a cabin in British Columbia, where Bruce receives Betty's necklace through the mail. He puts it in an envelope addressed to her. Somehow he was able to get Betty's necklace mailed to him so that he could return it to her. It's a small moment meant to tie up that loose end, but it doesn't help that the necklace was a poorly set up plot device in the first place. Anyway, Bruce starts meditating. His heartbeat speeds up, and days without incident drops down to 0. He opens his eyes, green, and smiles. At the start of the movie, Bruce was doing everything he could to suppress and get rid of the Hulk. Now, after successfully using him to help people, he purposefully unleashes him. He has come to believe that Hulk can be a force for good, and has embraced him as part of himself. This is further evidenced by Bruce being able to Hulk out without the need of an external pressure. He doesn't need to be beaten up, he doesn't need to see a loved one get hurt, he doesn't need to get shocked in the brain, and he doesn't need to plummet 1,000 feet into concrete. He can transform simply by closing his eyes and willing it. He is finally in control. But maybe don't do that inside. He's definitely gonna wreck the place.
When he's opening his eyes and he's in control and you know he's gonna transform, but in control, and you see his smirk, is he a good guy? Is he a bad guy?
Yeah.
And if he's a good guy, we go and do Hulk 2. And if you want him to be a bad guy, that could be the Avengers.
Okay, but there's nothing in the movie to suggest Bruce in control of Hulk would be a bad guy. Bruce and Hulk have only ever shown a desire to help people. This scene brings the movie full circle. We begin with Bruce meditating to prevent the Hulk, and we end with Bruce meditating to unleash him. It's an obvious way to show how his character has changed. The scene is great. It would suck if another MCU property shamelessly ripped it off. Our final scene is a conversation between General Ross and Tony Stark, which will eventually be recontextualized to make more sense. It has little bearing on the current movie. And that's the end. Looking at the movie overall, I find it interesting how each character can largely be defined by how they view the Hulk. For instance,
I don't know.
Stearns views the Hulk as a scientific marvel and a source of limitless potential. He is motivated to help Bruce by his curiosity and the promise of grand accomplishment. The Hulk drives him to reckless and unethical action, culminating in the creation of the Abomination and his own mutation.
It's like poetry, so if they rhyme.
The Hulk's width is rather large.
Betty views the Hulk with compassion and sympathy. She holds a deep love for Bruce, which allows her to view Hulk as an extension of him. Despite the extreme changes in appearance, the terrifying power, and the bestial, instinctual behavior, she recognizes Bruce within him. While others see Hulk as a monster or a weapon or a god, Betty only sees a person. And by the end of the movie, Bruce comes to share in this view.
And I was like, am I going to be cool? Are my kids going to think I'm cool?
Blonsky views the Hulk as the embodiment of ultimate strength. He starts the movie as a normal soldier who longs for the glory of battle. He becomes obsessed with obtaining and surpassing the power of the Hulk. Over the course of the movie, this drives him to take more and more extreme action, and it erodes away at his morality along the way. By the end, he's become a monster, both inside and out, and stands as the physical manifestation of what Bruce fears the Hulk might be.
More feelings.
More feelings?
More feelings, like a little bit more emotional next time.
I don't think that's what actors are supposed to do.
Okay, here we go, guys.
General Ross views the Hulk as a dangerous weapon to be harnessed. He wants to do so to make up for the failure of his Super Soldier program. Ross also wants to protect Betty. These two desires end up conflicting with one another. His pursuit of the Hulk results in Betty being put in harm's way. Ross's arc is about resolving this conflict by determining which is more important to him. By the end of the movie, he prioritizes Betty's safety over protecting his career. There are some issues with this arc, though. To show you what I mean, I'll describe an instance where it works and an instance where it doesn't. In Harlem, Blonsky hurts Betty. Ross is responsible for this. He said he'd take Blonsky off the team at the first sign of side effects, but doesn't, seemingly because of how useful he is for capturing Hulk. Therefore, he is responsible for Blonsky's actions. This works great. Contrast this with the Battle of Culver University. Ross orders the gunship to fire on Hulk, and Betty is caught up in it. He nearly killed Betty in an attempt to get Hulk. The problem is, this only occurs because he miraculously lost sight of Betty, despite her literally walking towards the object of his obsession. It's absurd and hurts Ross's character. What also weakens his arc is how little the movie explores his true motivations behind capturing Hulk. For most of the movie, you might assume he only wants to create a weapon to defend people, and is willing to do despicable things to achieve this. It's only in one line from Betty do we get the implications about his career and his more selfish goal.
And action?
Bruce views Hulk as a monster that harms others. He hurt Betty and carries a tremendous amount of guilt for that. This leads him to dissociate himself from the Hulk and drives his search for a cure. There is nothing good that can come from the Hulk. Betty's influence and the threat of Abomination work to convince him otherwise. He determines that Hulk is an extension of himself. They share the same desires. They both are capable of great ingenuity. They share some memories. And most importantly, they both want to help others. The movie well establishes Bruce's core traits. However, there's one aspect of Bruce's personality that I don't think is sufficiently fleshed out. It is vaguely hinted that Bruce used to be overconfident, and that it was this overconfidence that led him to experiment on himself and become the Hulk. This is only supported by the implications of one line of dialogue, and one small moment in a short flashback. Otherwise, nothing. I don't think this personality trait is adequately developed.
What do you think? Can we roll on this, guys?
Hulk views Hulk as, Hulk. Contrary to popular belief, Hulk isn't a dumb rage monster. He is capable of ingenuity in battle and actually shows an aversion to violence. He's motivated to fight to defend himself and especially to defend others. He draws strength not so much from anger generally, but from the anger felt when someone he loves is in danger. A strong theme of the movie is how power comes with a cost. There is great emphasis on how painful Blonsky's injections are, and how Bruce's transformation is an agonizing experience. Post-transformation, Bruce is left physically and mentally weak, and he's plagued by PTSD-like flashbacks. This is nicely complemented by the movie's depiction of violence. Power does not come free, and does not come without consequence. The largest issues that the movie suffers from are several large contrivances used to progress the plot. What's most disappointing about this is that the movie otherwise has great attention to detail.
I always try to give the audience the best movie possible, and it's in the details.
Even so, I'd argue that the movie's plot is nowhere near as broken as so many other MCU properties. Now, before finishing this review, I'd like to talk about some of the movie's deleted scenes. It has quite a few of them, and they include interesting material concerning the characterization of Ross and Bruce. Let's start with Ross. His deleted scenes delve deeper into his motivations, portraying them as more nuanced and meaningful than what we see in the final cut. After Brazil, Ross and Blonsky meet with General Greller to explain what happened.
You told me you were going to Brazil to nab a scientist. Another one of your super soldier experiments has gone haywire. Is there anything that came out of that program that didn't turn into a mess?
This is the concrete evidence we need to understand this facet of Ross's motivation. Ross's super soldier program is a stain on his career, which is why he's desperate to catch the Hulk. And it is this selfish motivation that puts him in conflict with Betty. In an extended conversation between Ross and Blonsky, we get more information to answer various questions the audience might ask about the plot. Like, what does radiation resistance have to do with super soldiers?
We thought it could give our boys built-in insulation against some of that depleted uranium no one likes talking about.
Why did Ross let Bruce test the serum on himself?
The politicians don't give a flying F about what real soldiers need. They like twin-rotor heliplanes that don't work while perfectly good machinery rots under their nose. So our money was running out. Banner was so sure of what he was onto that he tested it on himself. I let him.
Why has the other serum been sitting on ice this whole time?
One serum was very promising, but it was unstable. It made subjects unstable. Then Al-Haqqid happened. Congress lost its nerve, and they killed it.
This last bit implies that the serum contributed to Blonsky's moral corruption. In the theatrical cut, we could only assume it was the result of Blonsky's lust for power. I think this scene's implication potentially muddles up Blonsky's arc, shifting part of the blame for his actions away from him. We see more of why Ross and Bruce clashed when it came to the idea of Hulk as a weapon.
Banner was brilliant, one in a generation, but there are people who grasp that peace and freedom derive from power, and people who don't. He doesn't.
Ross genuinely believes harvesting this power as a weapon will benefit people. I think this humanizes Ross by emphasizing an altruistic aspect to his motivations. This also makes explicit the philosophical differences between Ross and Bruce, making it clearer why Bruce went on the run. After the battle at Culver University, Major Spar and General Ross get to talking about the Hulk.
There's no training for what you saw out there. It's a new power, let loose through a crack in the cliff of nature's mystery. And how many times do you think that's happened? Fire. The splitting of the atom. The universe unveils a secret, and people recoil. And then comes the person who stops trembling, who steps forward and seizes the burning stick and says, "This will I master." And civilization's history is written by those men.
This reinforces the movie's theme, comparing Hulk to the literal discovery of fire, something dangerous yet extremely beneficial if harnessed the right way. We also get more weight to Ross's obsession. He doesn't just see a super soldier, he sees a godlike power waiting to be seized and mastered. Getting that would make up for all his failures tenfold. Ross and Spar brief the soldiers on their way to New York. The plan is to snipe Bruce from a distance, but if he runs, they let him. Otherwise, they would risk a Hulk out in a densely populated area. He wants to capture Bruce, but won't risk hurting so many civilians. This complements Ross's earlier line.
Peace and freedom derive from power.
He genuinely cares about protecting lives.
Not much of a rematch, is it?
Unlike Ross, the risk doesn't faze Blonsky at all. He wants to face Hulk again, and doesn't care about the casualties it would cause. This provides more build-up for his actions as Abomination.
You sure about your boy?
The dog in the hunt that won't run from the bear if it shows up. If we play this right, I'll never have to let him off the leash.
We're shown more explicitly that Ross keeps using Blonsky despite the warning signs, because he's a good weapon against Hulk, making all this more directly his fault. After capturing Bruce, Ross and Betty have an extended version of their conversation.
Freedom, democracy, our way of life.
You like that?
We believe in so much. We have to start with truth or the rest of it doesn't work.
This is a meaningful accusation by Betty, because, given the previous deleted scenes, we know that Ross is genuine in his desire to protect people. Betty is basically telling him that his noble goal is meaningless, because of his despicable means. What he's fighting for is a lie, conjured to cover up a more selfish motivation. If Ross really wanted to fight for freedom and peace, he wouldn't have turned an innocent man into a fugitive, so he could use him to make a weapon. She's calling him out on his hypocrisy, which will influence his character arc. As for Bruce, we also further explore the aspects of his character left thin in the theatrical cut. In an alternate opening, Bruce travels out into the Arctic and attempts suicide, which fails when the Hulk emerges. It's a bleaker start to the movie, depicting Bruce at his lowest point. He stooped to suicide just to escape his curse, but his curse won't let him. It acts as another cost to his power. He can't even escape it by death. It's no wonder it was cut.
He tries to commit suicide. That was an important sequence, but we thought it was a little too harsh to put on the movie release, just because tons of kids go see that, and you don't want to start a movie with a suicide scene.
Without this scene, we never get to see Bruce hit rock bottom. It tinges the character in a sadness that colors his actions and motivations. The audience will always know in the back of their mind just how bad things could get for Bruce. It potentially adds more weight to his struggle. In Brazil, Bruce returns to his apartment after a run.
You know, when you hear someone at the door, go and check it out, okay? I mean, you hear all those other dogs barking, right? Don't you even want to try it? Like once or twice?
He then greets Mr. Blue with the message, knock knock. It's a lighthearted side of Bruce we see little of in the theatrical cut. Perhaps it was cut because they feared undercutting the seriousness of his circumstances. In the final cut, the only traces we have of this side of Bruce come from his interactions with Betty. They might have associated this jokey, lighthearted side of Bruce with the person he used to be, so we only see it after he reconnects with Betty. We have several deleted scenes at Betty's house, centering around Bruce, Betty, and Samson. Unlike the theatrical cut, Samson did go to Betty's home after she ran out of Stanley's, clearing up some of the confusion I had at this part of the movie. As Samson prepares dinner, Bruce and Betty have an extended conversation concerning the missing data. Bruce explains how he eventually heard of and got into contact with Samuel Stearns.
When I read what he had been doing, I didn't think it was possible to synthesize inhibitors that are that complex, but he's doing it by the bucket load.
His work is unbelievably brilliant.
Stearns wasn't just some scientist. He was an impressive one that seemed uniquely capable of helping him find a cure. This makes it more understandable that Bruce would put so much faith in him and his promise of a cure. About Stearns, Betty says,
He had some kind of an ethics cloud around him, but it didn't stop him.
And then later adds,
I mean, I hear he's a total anarchist.
This is great characterization of Stearns that further fleshes him out before we meet him proper. He has a reputation of anarchy and violating ethics in his work, which makes it more reasonable that he would help a fugitive with such a dangerous experiment.
Does the general know that you have this?
No, I don't think so.
He was in Brazil. He was there. I saw him.
How?
I have looked at it from every angle and it makes no sense to me. Unless it was Stearns, would he do something like that?
I hear he's a total anarchist, and I can't imagine him having any communication with him.
It doesn't matter. I have to go and see him.
This is a logical line of thought that Bruce must have had. He doesn't know about the missed drop of blood, so he doesn't know how Ross found him. Stearns is the obvious suspect. Because of that, you might wonder why Bruce would still go to him for help. This answers that. At dinner, Samson tells a funny story. Everyone laughs, but Bruce's laughter turns to tears.
It's been a long time since I felt light about anything.
You're safe here.
In conjunction with this moment in the previous scene,
I got in there as soon as I could before they took it all away. Hoped somewhere that it might tell us something someday. What?
Sometimes, hope comes back so quickly.
We're shown more of the long-term emotional impact the Hulk has had on him. He has not had the privilege of something so lighthearted as friends laughing around the dinner table in years. Like the alternate opening, we see more of the tragedy of his character. The next morning, Bruce is forced to walk because Betty left her car lights on all night. They can't be seen leaving together, so Bruce and Betty will meet up at Culver University. This may explain why they showed up there rather than at a bus stop. Except not really. Couldn't they have still met up at the bus stop to say goodbye? Also, Betty leaving her car lights on is a pretty flimsy excuse to get this to happen this way. When they arrive at Culver University, Bruce talks about the incident and the research that led up to it.
I just keep asking myself what it was we were trying to accomplish that was worth all this.
I think we were trying to understand. We wanted to advance things a little.
I think those were things that we told ourselves because we liked the way they sounded.
Nobody thought something like that was possible.
Nature takes a long time to build us. Delicate, wonderfully complicated systems refined over billions of years, and nobody understood that better than you and me. And so we did what? We come in here with these big brains of ours, and we think that we're gonna do what? Improve it overnight? And then we act surprised when it blows up in our face in some way that we didn't expect.
This is the explicit confirmation of Bruce's overconfidence the theatrical cut lacks. Bruce reflects on the arrogance at thinking they could tamper with human biology and assume something unexpected wouldn't happen. And what's more important is seeing the regret Bruce has for having acted that way, explaining why we don't see the same overconfidence in him today. And this adds to the theme of Bruce being cursed. He was reckless and tampered with something he didn't fully understand, and must now live with the consequences. At the motel, after their failed coitus, Betty asks why one of Bruce's scars hasn't healed, while the others have.
No, that's mine. His scars heal, mine don't.
Bruce doesn't refer to Hulk as an it for the first time, though he still makes an effort to differentiate them. To Bruce, his scars and Hulk's scars are not the same.
His scars heal, mine don't.
Yes, they do. They leave a mark. They stop hurting. Look at me. That pain didn't last. Not knowing was so much worse. I looked for your face everywhere. I never stopped.
This scene directly addresses the guilt Bruce carries. This is Betty's way of forgiving him for it, which will later help Bruce start to see Hulk as a force that could be used to help people, not hurt them. After all, it's this guilt that colors his view of Hulk. And that's all the deleted scenes I care to talk about. There are others with interesting content, but I think these are the most important, given the additional depth they provide to Bruce and Ross. If I had to guess, I'd say someone was afraid of the movie turning out too heady and flopping like Ang Lee's Hulk.
You know, we accomplished a lot of things with Ang Lee's version. It really works as a standalone story about the inner angst, the inner rage of Bruce Banner. With this one, with The Incredible Hulk, we wanted to have more fun and have more action this time around and really deliver the Hulk that we thought audiences wanted to see.
I don't think Bruce and Ross are whole people without these scenes, and the movie is weaker not having them.
It's important when you edit a movie not to be afraid of losing stuff along the way.
Maybe fear, like anger, is not always a bad thing. So, is 2008's The Incredible Hulk as bad as they say? While the scenes left on the cutting room floor show that the movie isn't as good as it could have been, the final product is far from bad. I think a mostly intact plot and largely strong characterization come together to create a quality movie. It's certainly better than most of the MCU.